te yata om gate gate para gate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om te gate para gate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha ta om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate 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 parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate gate para gate parasangate bodhisoha te yata om gate gate para gate parasangate bodhisoha te yata om gate gate para gate parasangate bodhisoha te yata om gate gate para gate parasangate bodhisoha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhisoha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhisoha te yata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhisoha. I also notice there's another satellite center, so to say, is the center in medicine. I see Ani Tsomo there. So anyway, welcome back, everyone. And I want to encourage, like those of you who are joining us on through Zoom, because you are not local, it's good, if you are in a particular area and if traffic is not too crazy, for you all to gather as well as groups. There's something different when we are doing this in the physical space together with others. Because, unless we are very stable in our practice, having other people in a three-dimensional way to practice together is a very good thing. So to that end, please don't take for granted the Dharma centers that exist where you are. Even if you may not feel particularly connected to the Dharma center, then you can go still as an offering to the place to help whenever you can. I don't mean you go torture yourself if you cannot stand the place or the people there. But do appreciate the fact that, there are Dharma centers around where you are. So look beyond just like, what can it give to me? If it cannot give much to you, do recognize that it is probably giving something to other people. And so it's a form of generosity to turn up, to support financially, or to support by helping to clean, helping to staff, helping to volunteer in one way or another. And so this is the situation we have here in Urban Dharma. As Judy mentioned, everyone here is volunteer, and it takes a lot to keep the place available and open. In part because it is not one person's place. In a way, if it is one person's place, there is a certain simplicity to that. That person makes sure that everything goes according to how they want it. And there's, something simple and straightforward about that. But here, because it's not like that, then it takes a lot of effort. Sometimes effort that is replicated, sometimes effort that seems why is there so much? Could we be more efficient? Sometimes it's also good to not be so efficient. We're not machines. We're human beings. So sometimes it's also okay not to be so efficient, because there's more than efficiency that we want, we want to have the experience of human beings being together and finding more and more skillful ways for human beings to be together in three-dimensional form, because then, the good smells, the slightly less than good smells, it's all there, to put it in, kind of in those terms, right, directly, it's when we learn, but then if everything is under control, like if you might feel, it's easier if I'm just at home, then everything, you have this illusion of everything is under control. Then what happens to that, like do you become more and more, unconnected, isolated? Not very skillful, right? So anyway, just a few words about the importance of gathering together for Dharma practice, because when we practice the Dharma, we're not just like downloading Dharma information. If we're doing that, then yes, of course, you don't need to go anywhere. Speaking of going, so gate, gone, paragate, gone beyond, parasangate, completely gone beyond, bodhi, awake, gone beyond, completely gone beyond, awake, bodhi. Swaha is almost like amen. Amen. It's an exclamation of like completion, so be it. Then often mantras have an om at the beginning. Although in earliest versions of this sutra, the om is not there. Yeah? But in later forms of this sutra, om was added. So anyway, gone beyond, completely gone beyond, awake. In one of the 8 Indian commentaries, the commentary by this Indian master called Mahajana, or Sri Mahajana. By the way, if you are a geek and you like books, it's a good thing. Scrolling, I don't know what's going on. Reading books, is a good thing. There are 2 geeky books. One is called The Heart Sutra Explained. To the degree it can be explained. Of course it can be explained. Heart Sutra Explained. And then Elaborations on Emptiness. Both are basically translations, but with a lot of help. Essays discussing the translation. The Elaborations on Emptiness translates the 8 Indian commentaries. Heart Sutra Explained is a basically same material, but organized like chapter by chapter, meaning like the opening of the sutra and then drawing from the 8 Indian commentaries, teasing out implications of the first section of the sutra, the second, the third, the fourth. So they're both done by this Buddhist scholar, or scholar of Buddhism. I don't know if he's Buddhist, which is okay. Right? More important is we are all Buddhists. Some of us are Buddhists. But we are all Buddhists is a more fundamental point. Anyway, by a scholar of Buddhism called Don Lopez. So he has these two books. So from time to time, I'm staring down here, is looking at some of these commentaries here. Anyways, Sri Mahajana, in his commentary, would, for those of you interested in the more kind of like what meanings can we associate with the mantra. And so this is, I think, what we can say, you know. Not so much what the mantra means. Mantras usually don't have any meaning. But what meanings have been associated with the mantra, that we can see. Yeah? So one set of meanings associated with this mantra. So in this mantra, if you divide the gone, you have 5 basically. Gone, 5 movements you could say. Gone beyond, completely gone beyond, Bodhi, exclamation point. Yeah? So 5. So for Sri Mahajana, he says that this in some ways encodes, brings together, presents, all those words can be used because there are layers of meaning there. Brings together, encodes. So if it is encode, think of it as encoding, meaning then when you have that code, you can also proliferate from there. Yeah, so mantras in a way are the way we think of coding language today, yeah, with computers, right? Just a short chain can affect many things. And of course, if the chain is wrong, then, you know, it becomes gate, right? I don't know where those gates will lead you to. So think of it as sort of encoding, and then can become these powerful words. So words have power. The idea that words have power precedes Buddhism. Buddhism came out of a Vedic context. And in Vedic religion, words and more to the point, sounds is said to contain a lot of power. In the Buddhist tradition, coming out of that context, historically the Buddha downplayed the power of sound, the historical Buddha. Because maybe it got a little too distracting. But even with the historical Buddha, we will see here and there instances where he gave his disciples, certain chains of words and sounds associated with meanings, and say, you can train your mind in this way. But by and large, in this early period, Buddha, understandably, because of the larger context, which gave a lot of significance to sound and the power of sound, almost like you could say it got too woo-woo. So then he did not emphasize so much. But later Buddhist traditions weren't shy with reincorporating these things. So I think our our relationship with these would be, we don't want to be fundamentalists about this and say, oh, well, the traditions say so, it must be like this, you know. So there's usefulness in kind of understanding historical context, yeah? Because we can draw good lessons from there, right? So anyway, in later Indian Buddhism, mantras are brought back in a prominent way. And then it's left to Buddhist teachers, masters, to begin to use mantra in a way that becomes helpful. So here, the first gone, or these 5 movements, so to say, are related to what's known as the 5 paths. So the concept of the 5 paths is that the entire path to awakening, the entire process to awakening, can be divided into these 5 stages. And so particularly in the Bodhisattva context, there is this notion of the 5 paths. So the path that then leads to stages. Another way to talk about the 5 paths is actually the 10 perfections as well. So these are various way of kind of mapping out the process. So the 5 paths, the first one is called the path of accumulation. The path of accumulation. So that is the path when we begin. That is where we go from ordinary, confused, don't even know we are confused state to beginning to understand what the situation is and beginning to want to change something, to do something about it. There are way more technical discussions about all these paths. I'm giving you kind of an overview. So the path of accumulation is when we begin to build up, accumulate in that sense. Accumulate is not always a bad word if you're accumulating the right things. So in particular here we say accumulate merit. Merit is these positive states of mind, this fuel that you need for the long haul. You accumulate merit and you build up insight, wisdom. So the path of accumulations. Then the third path is called the path of seeing. You're like, wait, what happened to path 2? Never mind, let's go to path 3 first. The path of seeing is called the path of seeing because you embark on this path when you begin to see truth for the first time. Truth in the sense of the way things are, rather than the ways things tend to deceptively appear. So it's often defined as that first instance where you have a direct, not intellectual, but direct kind of like from the level of marrow, you see the truth of, in our context, the reality about emptiness. And that puts you on what they say, you become irreversible because you have seen the truth directly. In fact, in a lot of the Buddha's teachings, in a lot of texts, there's tremendous emphasis on trying your darndest best to at least arrive at the path of seeing. Then after that, it's a matter of working out all the residual stuff. So the second path is called the path of joining. It links accumulation and seeing. You're like, who made this up? Yes, they like 5. So 2 is the path of joining. Now, of course, there are more detailed reasons as to why the second path is called the path of joining. We don't have time to go into that. Suffice to say, the path of joining is that kind of period that links your beginning and you seeing directly truth. Then after that is called the path of meditation. Then you're like, oh, you don't meditate until you get there? No. This meditation of the path of meditation is now, your mind is now settled on the truth that you have perceived. So meditation there becomes a process of habituating. To get used to deepen, to stabilize the truth that you have directly perceived. And in that way, you could say, everything that came before, no matter how quietly you can sit for however long, is actually technically not yet meditation. The meditation and the path of meditation is basically the process of getting used to. Getting used to what? Getting used to this truth that you have directly come face to face with, and now you are habituating. And then the fifth one is called the path of no more learning. At the end of the path of no more learning is Bodhi exclamation. So gone, gone, gone beyond, completely gone beyond, Bodhi exclamation encodes the 5 paths. So that's one way that the mantra has been explained. If I remember correctly, I think in East Asia, in one commentary of the Heart Sutra by the Japanese founder of esoteric Buddhism, he went to China for his training. Kukai in his Kobodaishi in his commentary on the Heart Sutra, he links the 5 Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhisattva also with the path. And I think he links it to, the first one is at the stage of the gods and humans. So like learning how to be decent gods and humans, so to say. So all the cultivating of generosity and disciplined conduct, basically. And then the next gate he associates with the path of the hearers, the Shravakas. Gate, Gate, Paragate he associates with the path of the solitary realizers. So these are various paths on kind of the Buddhist levels of attainments. Some of you know these terms. So, and then the fourth one are the bodhisattvas. And then the fifth is the level of Buddhas. So that's another way of explaining the mantra. Yeah. So now, when we look at this text, go to page 8 in our booklet. So then, I think it's good to take a look there first before we go to the beginning, because there it tells us, right, what is the purpose? Like, what can we get out of this wisdom of the perfection of wisdom? Then specifically, you could say, what can I get out of, what can I realistically expect if I really understand the Heart Sutra? What is the benefit? So it says here, therefore, Shariputra, since bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Since their minds are without obscuration, there is no fear. They pass completely beyond error and attain complete nirvana. This describes how bodhisattvas become Buddhas. And they pass completely beyond error, beyond confusion, beyond the afflictive, harmful emotions. They have left all of that behind and they attain complete nirvana. Nirvana is the state where all confusions, all afflictive emotions are extinguished. Gone, done, no more. And the main point here I want you to pay attention to is there is no fear. There are many ways to be free from fear. That's also important to understand. There is the foolish way of without fear. So many have died in more than one way because they have no fear, right? Biologically, because human beings figured out how to have fear, Our ancestors figured that out. So here we are, still around, right? But it looks like some of us are intent on reversing this evolutionary progress that we have made to erase fear when there should be fear, right? So there are many ways to be free from fear. And there are many types of fear, right? So just because here it says there is no fear, it doesn't mean, any and all types of fear. So we want to know what kind of fear is there an absence of by relying on this. Now how do bodhisattvas achieve this state of no fear? Jigme. Jigme. Jig is fear in Tibetan. Me is no fear. Isn't there a T-shirt that says things like that? Yeah, right. Some like surfer dude things. No fear. Yeah. I don't know. I live in the mountains. What do I know about surfing? Since their minds are without obscurations, it's the no fear that comes from the mind is free from obscurations. What does it mean that the mind is free from obscurations? So what that tells us is, to say that the mind can be free from obscuration is also saying that the mind in itself is without obscuration. That the stains, that the obscurations that exist right now are extraneous, temporary conditions that appear. And that we can be free from this. Yeah, so the opening verse, linked verses of the Dhammapada tells us this very clearly. Can you pull a copy out? I want to read to you this opening. It tells us about the difference between ordinary beings and beings who are Buddhas awake. And then all of us in between those two. So the opening verse of the Dhammapada, in the translation that I have here, it says, all states of being are determined by the heart. The heart is the mind. Same here. All states of being. So it's saying, everything you experience, that's the all states of being. All states of being are determined by the heart. It is the heart that leads the way. The heart decides. Thank you. It is the heart that leads the way. Just as the wheel of an ox cart follows the hoof print of the animal that draws it, so suffering will surely follow when we speak or act impulsively from an obscured heart. That describes us. All states of being are determined by the heart. It is the heart that leads the way. As surely as our shadow never leaves us, so well-being will follow when we speak or act with an unobscured heart. That's the difference. Buddha's hearts, Buddha's minds are unobscured. And because their hearts and minds are unobscured, then their speech and their actions only result in well-being, happiness. like a shadow, never leaving us. But when we act and speak impulsively, that's the opposite of restraint. That is the opposite of disciplined conduct. When we speak or act impulsively, that is when our hearts are obscured, our minds are obscured. And when obscured, then we create suffering. So we create our realities. That's the more basic point of the way the Buddha taught about karma. It's not even. Sometimes we think, it's about rewards and punishment. It's about, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. That's a very crude understanding of karma. Yeah? The subtle point about karma is, whatever we experience, those things that we label pleasant, those things that we label unpleasant, those things that we label desirable, those things we label undesirable, and those things that we are kind of neutral towards, they are all determined by our heart, by our minds. So here, coming back to the Heart Sutra, it says, since their minds are without obscuration, so they have arrived at a place where the mind is no longer misled. So that is the path of seeing. Having seen reality as it is, and bring it back home, rather than reality with a capital R, reality, bring it home, seen nature of mind. Maybe that's even a very big word, nature of mind, dun dun dun. And if you hang out around Tibetan Buddhists, there's a lot of hype about nature of mind. Ooh. We don't know what that means, Yeah? So let's bring it even closer to home. Can you see how your mind, how your heart works? Can you see how easily you get dragged around through the mud, through the thorns? Can you see how habitually you will bite at the wriggly worms even after having hooked so many times? It's like, maybe this is just a worm. And then flop, 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 flop. And rinse and repeat. So, to be able to see how the mind, how our mind works, again, put aside metaphysics, put aside philosophy, put aside big concepts, big ideas, even put aside, how the brain is wired. Directly look. And that's at the heart of what we call meditation practice. There are all sorts of techniques that you can use. And for sure, these techniques were developed, were given by the Buddha, and then expanded, and then generations of human beings like you and me have used them, have found them useful, have further, kind of polished them and refined them. But don't get carried away by the methods when you have no idea what the methods were developed for. So first we need some clarity about what is it for. Yeah? It is for seeing. How does this machine here works? How does this mind works? That's part and parcel of this whole big thing about seeing the nature of mind. First, learn something about the monkey. Learn how to work with the monkey. Sometimes the monkey needs, tough love. Sometimes the monkey just needs love. You learn how to see, how to work with this monkey. That's what it means where there's no obscurations. Or lesser and lesser and lesser. Since their minds are without obscuration, then there is no fear. So what fear are we talking about here? For a bodhisattva, the most dangerous fear for a bodhisattva is what? That this vow, that this task is impossible. What vow, what task? The task, promising to the task of, I shall become a Buddha for the welfare, for the benefit of all beings. And in order to become Buddha for the sake of all beings, I have to serve all beings. It's a chicken and egg. I want to become Buddhas for the sake of all beings. How do I become Buddhas for the sake of all beings? I serve all beings now. How can you serve all beings? By becoming a Buddha. Right? It's this recursive loop. It's not a simple linear cause and effect. Yeah? And sometimes it's very hard to serve sentient beings. But in the context of taking the vow, the bodhicitta vow in the ceremony especially, after you have received the vow, it says, I now, it's kind of worded in such a way that it's a little mysterious if you don't understand what's going on. But in there it says, I now invite all beings to be my guest. So this is based on the Indian ideas and ideals of hospitality. So may they now all be my guests. Not American style hosting guests. Bathroom is there, fridge is there, help yourself, good luck. A lot of Asian friends who come over later, they're like, I don't know, they don't like me? No, they're just like that. It's not they don't like you. We value privacy, so even with a guest, we leave them alone. Again, cultural baggage from both sides, One of the first things my Tibetan teacher told me when we first met, I went to his center, and he was like, would you like some tea or you want something to eat? And I said, no. And of course, he knows I'm Asian and he's Asian. And he was like, and then he told me, he said, when I first came from India to the US, he said, I was always hungry and thirsty. He said, don't make that mistake. I said, what do you mean? He said, because people will ask me, do you want something to drink? I said, no, and then they never ask again. Or they'll ask me, do you want something to eat? I said, no, and they'll never ask again. And he says, of course, in Asia, we always say no first, after people have asked like 4 times, then you finally admit, yes, I'm actually hungry, but even that you don't show, Yeah, but I will invite all beings, I will invite them to be my guest. This idea of serving them. And it's not easy. So there are some stories about like how unreasonable sentient beings can be. Some of you have already heard this story. So there is actually Shariputra. Shariputra, in some ways in this sutra, is like so it's basically, right? Avalokiteshvara is teaching Shariputra. Shariputra asks Avalokiteshvara. So here, it says on page 4, it says, then by the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, ask Avalokiteshvara. How should a son of noble lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom train? Basically, he's saying himself, how should I train? How should I train? So here it has Shariputra asking that question. Now, some background. Shariputra was one of the historical Buddha's chief disciples. There were two of these, Shariputra and Maugayayana, his two chief disciples. In particular, Shariputra is renowned as very intelligent. But in the sutra, he is presented as intelligent as he is, he still doesn't have true wisdom. So he has to ask someone else. And in this case, he's asking the Bodhisattva of love and compassion, Avalokiteshvara. So Shariputra has to ask, how should someone train? How should, not just someone, but how should... So son of noble lineage is a fancy way of saying Bodhisattva. Yes. Yeah. So how does someone so it doesn't mean, you're born like, to the Kennedys or, born to the Rockefellers, like, you're like, wow, how am I going to, well, you take the vow. That's how you become a child of noble lineage. And noble lineage is the lineage of the Buddhas, having the Buddha DNA, right? Which actually, because of Buddha nature, we have this Buddha DNA. So now, question is, how should I train? So there is a broader story about Shariputra. It is said that Shariputra has gone for the lesser attainment of Arhat. Yeah. According to one way of understanding Shariputra. Just to say, ultimately, what path is Shariputra on? Don't know. But at least in the context of, in this context, he's presented as having gone to the lesser goal of personal jailbreak. It's like, I can't bring so many people on this jailbreak because we might all get caught, right? So I'm going to go. Okay, tata. Not that I don't care about you, but this is too risky. Right? So Shariputra is taking that route. Yeah. So then there's a story that explains, why. Apparently, at one point, Shariputra, many lifetimes ago, actually made the vow to become a Buddha. Gave rise to bodhicitta. So elsewhere, we also learn that once you have taken the bodhisattva vow, the bodhicitta vow, it's irreversible. No matter what you do, it's irreversible. According to one explanation. It's irreversible because it's merely a formalization of what you already are, right? How can you get away from your nature? But anyway, in the temporal time, it is said that Shariputra took the bodhicitta vow many lifetimes ago in the presence of a particular Buddha, but then he gave up. Or at least gave up in the short term. Yeah? Why did he give up? There are actually two versions. First version. So he said, I have taken the bodhisattva vow, so now I'm going to serve all beings. Not too long after he said those words, there was a trickster God figure who goes, okay, let's go test him and see how strong is his resolve. So what does this God do? He comes in the guise of someone without a hand. Oh, without both hands. Limbless. It comes to Shariputra many lifetimes ago and asks, can you give me one of your hands? So, Shariputra goes, well, yeesh. Well, I do have 2 hands, and he has none. I have to do what I have to do. So, he's going to cut one of his limbs, right? And then, being that he's right-handed, so he's about to sever his left limb. Then he thought, but right limb is more useful. So he's so considerate, So he switched hand, and then chop off. Probably took longer to hack off because he's right-handed, Ouch, 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 And then kaplunk, right? His right limb. So then he picks up the right limb and gives it to this guy. And the guy just threw a fit. No, I'm not going to accept this. This is so rude. How can you give people things with your left hand? And he turns around and walks away. So it's said that at that point, Shariputra says, I give up. I cannot serve sentient beings the way that bodhisattvas are supposed to serve sentient beings. Sentient beings are completely unreasonable. So he gave up his bodhicitta vow. A variation to this story, obviously now, you're like, okay, we're not being too literal about this, okay? A variation to this story is a guy without eyes come to Shariputra and says, do you have both your eyes? And he says, yes. He said, can you give me one? And he thought, oh, okay, well, I guess I could dig one out and give it to him. So he proceeded to gave it to this guy without eyes. And this guy was so happy, right? Unlike the other variation, hopping around, oh, I have an eye, I got an eye, I got an eye, I got an eye. And then he drops it on the ground and squishes it. Shariputra was just shocked, why would you do that? I gave you my good eye. He said, I like the sound that it makes. Shariputra said, no, I give up. Maybe you have not dug your eyes out, maybe you have not sawed a limb, but for sure, I think we have all felt that way when dealing with others. Don't give up your bodhicitta vow, even when such unreasonable people turn up in your lives. When they tell this story, they also say, don't overextend what you are capable of doing now. So it's also a lesson about skillfully protecting your vow without overextending. In our current language, having healthy boundaries. Don't give up on people, but being a bodhisattva is not turning yourself into a doormat. You need to build up your strength, but fundamentally, don't give up. So this is the fear. In fact, when we give up, it's out of fear. When we sort of think that this is impossible, this is so immense, this undertaking is so impossible, then the fear that leads to giving up on sentient beings, and then giving up the commitment, the vow to achieve Buddhahood. don't let that fear take over, because if that fear takes over, then it will be the end, right? At least in temporal time, in the temporal context. And so how do we then achieve this state of no fear? By our minds not having obscuration. Then more specifically, how do we have the minds not having obscuration? Is to realize the truth of the perfection of wisdom. So going back further, they say they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Now, the first part of that sentence is a little bit odd. You're like, wait, how does these two connect? Again, on page 8, therefore, Shariputra, since bodhisattvas have no attainment, because they have no attainment, therefore they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. And then you're like, wait, what does that mean? No attainment. So much of the path, especially the bodhisattva path, is about attaining, arriving at a increasingly more and more mature, increasingly more and more stable states of mind, of the heart, of being free from more and more confusion, to be free from them. So in one context, it's so much about attaining. And you can think about, like, in terms of serving sentient beings, in terms of pleasing sentient beings. And in fact, there are all these teachings for bodhisattvas in the 100,000 verses, 25,000 verses, 8,000 verses that go into details. For example, 4 ways of attracting sentient beings. One is to give them material goods. 2 is to give them encouraging words. So there's all these different aspects of what bodhisattvas need to do, need to cultivate in order to serve beings. But all of that needs to be done with an understanding of no attainment. No attainment. The broader topic of emptiness. Emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is not do nothing, but doing everything with a specific understanding. The understanding of no attainment. Nothing to achieve. And yet, to the end of time, doing. But no attainment. In plain words, if you don't have this idea of attainment, then there's nothing to fail. But unlike ordinary meaning of that, which probably results in, oh, okay, I'm not going to do anything. This is like, you do everything. But you have no expectations. Not so easy. We all have expectations. But bodhisattvas have no expectations. And it said that even no expectations of enlightenment, poetically speaking, not literally speaking. Poetically speaking, bodhisattvas don't even have the goal of becoming Buddhas. So sometimes it is said that bodhisattvas are those who will postpone their enlightenment until all beings are Buddhas. Right? Again, poetic expression. If literally that is the case, then nobody would ever become a Buddha. nobody would ever be awake because everybody is waiting for everybody else to become awake. No, you first. No, you first. No, you first. No, you first. Americans don't have this problem. Oh, okay, me first, okay. This kind of traffic jam is specific to Asians. No, you first. No, you first. No, you first. Oh, Midwest too. Oh, okay, yes. Oh, those Lutherans. Yeah, so the wisdom of the perfection of wisdom, right, is a specific kind of insight that clears the obscurations, clears the mental defilements. And by clearing the mental defilements, allow us to commit to and to continue and to do the impossible. Because it's the impossible, so we make a pledge to do it. Defies logic. Now let's go to page 1. That verse in the page 1 is not in the original Heart Sutra that begins with ineffable, inconceivable, and inexpressible is the perfection of wisdom, unborn and unceasing like the nature of the sky, of space, the sphere of activity of the discriminating awareness wisdom. So this perfection of wisdom is both the reality as it is, the way things are, as well as the mind, the wisdom mind that realizes that. And so it's, in a way you could say, it's both the subject and the object of wisdom. And so not only are things the way they are, but our minds that understand this have always also been in that state. Yeah, so this wisdom, when we talk about the perfection of wisdom, is not just a subject or a topic to be understood, to be realized. But the very mind that realizes it has the same nature as this wisdom that is being achieved. And so this, both the subject and the object of perfection of wisdom, is the perfection of wisdom, and therefore this perfection of wisdom is called the mother of the conquerors of past, present, and future 3 times. Conquerors are the Buddhists. Buddhists have conquered their afflictive emotions, conquered the hordes of confusion. And to you, I pay homage and praise. So in later Buddhist traditions, perfection of wisdom is embodied with a form, and female, because she is the mother, as in Buddhas are birthed from her, poetically speaking. So in the iconographic traditions, in the artistic traditions of Buddhist art, this perfection of wisdom is depicted in a female form. There are some variations to this form, but basically one of the most common ones would have her seated, but seated in meditation, golden colored, wearing jewels and silks. The jewels and the silks and the crown, earrings, anklets, armlets, bracelets, necklaces, all of that, they express the qualities, the Buddha qualities of the awakened state. So the awakened state is not only an absence of obscurations, an absence of the afflictive emotions, an absence of confusion. It's also the presence of qualities that benefit others. The presence of patience, the presence of skill, the presence of love, the presence of compassion. So it's not just absence. So that's why the word Buddha has been explained as both having the quality of absence and presence. Absence of confusion and the afflictive, destructive emotions, and presence of qualities and virtues that benefit beings. And so the Tibetan word for Buddha is Sangye. Sang is to dissipate, to clear. Ge is to expand. So a Sangye or a Buddha is one who has dissipated all the afflictive, destructive emotions that are temporary, that are not part of our nature. And in doing that, the qualities are now fully blossomed, fully apparent. So the perfection of wisdom, seated in meditation, golden colored, with all the jewels and the ornaments, adornments, then it's said that she has 4 hands. Yeah? Her first 2 hands are in this meditation posture, this mudra of the mind being settled and stable. Then her right hand holds a vajra, which is a ritual instrument, but also a weapon, vajra. And then her left hand, second left hand, holds a volume, a text. So all these have meaning. The text, the vajra, and the meditation is referring to the 3 ways of acquiring wisdom or insight. The 3 ways that she teaches, she helps, and the 3 ways that we can approach her. The text, the scripture, is through studying and learning, like what we're doing now. The vajra is referring to now thinking through, reflecting on, knowing how to digest what you're learning, what you're hearing. So the wisdom that is acquired through learning, studying, listening, the wisdom that is acquired through investigating, considering, thinking through, and finally the wisdom that arises from meditating. So meditating now means you have learned, you have considered, now put it in your life. Now apply it. When you apply it, confidence will grow. Wait. Kaput. Yeah, when you apply, that's the meditating. So again, the word meditation is a big word, in Buddhist practice. It's not just sitting quietly. Yeah? More so here, it means what you have learned, what you have considered, now you need to take into your experience. So in Tibetan, there's a word for this called nyamlen, which is, we just translate as practice. Len is to take, again, tonglen, to take. And nyam is experience, to take into your experience. And not just theory, So one of the dangers, like I said, in Tibetan Buddhism, for us as students that of learning in this tradition, sometimes we might mistake our having accumulated all this information. We may mistake that as real attainment. You're like, I know all these things. yeah, you know all these things, which is great. But then, have you reflected? Yes, I have. Now have you applied? So, some other traditions, I know, they emphasize, they take maybe a different approach. And so we could also learn from that. Some other approach would be no theorizing until you have set 3 retreats. 3 10 days. 16-hour days of watching this mind. After the first retreat, you like, a mind is a terrible thing to watch. Do 2 more of these. Then you can sign up for the theory class. Yeah? Goenkaji's method is the Vipassana. Basically, sit 3 10-day retreat, then you can sign up for the Foundations of Mindfulness scripture learning. There is power to that because, right? Learn something about how this monkey works. So that when you actually study the sutras, it's not all just concepts. Yeah? In a sense, I'm doing the opposite of that. So sometimes I wonder, useful or not? Hard to say. Yeah. Yeah. Which is just to say that please don't just let this be, interesting information. And even that is not as dangerous as, yes, I got it. That is even more dangerous. Oh, yes, I got it. Then suffering turns up. When suffering comes in the door, all your theories fly out windows. And you can do nothing. Be careful. So then now, page 2. Thus have I heard at one time the Bhagavan, meaning the Buddha, was dwelling at Vulture Peak in Rajagriha. So this is, today you can go to this place in India called Vulture's Peak. The Indian government has improved the site. It's kind of a hill. Right? You ascend and then just a small space, maybe about this corner, maybe. yeah, this side. There is a rock that juts out that looks like a vulture about to take flight. So they say maybe that's why it's called Vulture's Peak. Yeah? In Rajagriha. Raja is king, so it's in the king's city. So that was like the main city in northern India at that time. And so he was with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan entered the samadhi on the enumerations of dharmas called profound illumination. Samadhis are these stable states of mind. To cultivate samadhi is to cultivate stabilizing the mind. So there are many ways to stabilize the mind. One way is to suppress. So temporarily stable, but ultimately unreliable. Some other ways of cultivating samadhi emphasizes a lot of sweeping away everything. Yeah? So that the mind becomes. Yeah? You have come across, right, this expression, single-pointed, maybe, right? Yeah, single-pointed. But again, there are different methods, there are different ways, and even interpretation as to what is this single-pointed. In the tradition that I come from, which is like Kagyu, and not limited to Kagyu, I'm sure there are approaches across Buddhist traditions, but in the Kagyu In the Mahamudra teachings, it says, the real samadhi that we should cultivate is not a samadhi that excludes things. It's not a samadhi, it's not a mental stability that is the result of isolating. So we say, you cultivate this samadhi not by shutting down the senses, but instead training let all your sense doors, we say, remain open. And so actually we don't close our eyes when we do our formal meditation. We lower the gaze, but we don't close our eyes, because the goal is not, or the method doesn't involve shutting down the senses, but letting all the sense doors remain open and not moving. So all the sense experiences come and go, and as they come and go, and in a way, the more they come and go, the more understanding you have of their nature, which is they only come and go. In the Zen tradition, is saying, they call it, in one Zen tradition, they call it, they call this the figuring out, the sorting out of host and guests. Meaning guests are the temporary things that come and go. And sorting out who is the host and who are the guests. So in that sense, the more guests coming would give you more opportunity to figure out who is the guest and who is the host. So then you don't fear. You don't fear. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thoughts. So in the Kagyu, Gampopa says, the more of these experiences, the greater the wisdom. But not literally, right? It's saying when you have this method, when you know how to cultivate, how to train the mind, then you don't need to shut out the world. Right now we are being dragged around by sense experiences. So one way is to kick them all out. Lock up the door, put a big sign, do not disturb. That's one approach. And maybe sometimes we need that when things get too crazy. But the kind of samadhi that is referred to here, profound illumination, profound clarity. Now look at this kind of contrast here. At that time, the Bhagavan, the Buddha, entered the samadhi. The samadhi, the immediate samadhi, is the samadhi on the enumerations of dharmas. So what does that mean, enumerations of dharmas? What's to enumerate? To count, right? In order to be able to count, you need to be able to what? Tell the difference between 1 and 2. Otherwise, you can't count, 1 goat, 2 goats, 3 goats, 4 goats. Wait, is that 2 goats or 1 goat there, right? So enumerations means seeing differences, right? So he is arriving at this profound illumination by not all one. So he doesn't have that bumper sticker. He has the bumper sticker that says a lot of different things are going on. Not such a cool bumper sticker to have. A lot of different things are going on. So he has entered. This is a peculiar, right? Stability of mind, where he is enumerating all dharmas. Dharmas, for now, let's just say dharmas are everything. Every experience, everything is a dharma. And he has entered stability of mind, samadhi, by enumerating the dharmas. And by enumerating the dharmas, by counting the dharmas, not counting sheep to fall asleep, but counting, enumerating all experiences, all phenomena, and arrive at profound illumination. And this profound illumination is seeing things as they are, rather than merely how they appear to be. So in other words, the Buddha is in this state of seeing diversity, of seeing oneness. Yes, the oneness part is the profound illumination. The diversity part is the enumerations of dharmas. So the Buddha is actually in that state. And while the Buddha is in that state, then how to arrive at that state? That is playing out in this conversation between the Lord of love and compassion and the one who is very intelligent. It's not saying intelligence is not good, but not enough. And just mere love and compassion also not enough. So a dialogue needs to take place between Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra. They need to talk. Intelligence need to probe. Love and compassion then answers. So this conversation then unfolds. And also at that time, so what was Avalokiteshvara doing? He beheld the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, meaning he apprehended, he understood how to practice this perfection of wisdom, and so he directed his practice towards perceiving the five skandhas to be empty. Empty of what? When we say empty, right? Even though we don't always say all of it, it's empty of something, right? When we say this room is empty, right now you're like, no, it's not. Yes, it is. It's empty of chimpanzees. You're like, oh yes, right, yes, it's empty. You're like, well, I'm not sure about that one over there, but otherwise, yes, you know. So it's not merely empty. Here, empty of intrinsic nature. So that we need to understand. So in fact, when the Buddha says empty or emptiness, he is talking about a particular kind of lack. Not a single lack, lacking intrinsic nature. Sometimes also translated as inherent nature, sometimes translated as self-nature, inherent existence. The Sanskrit is swabhava. Swabhava. Swa is self, by itself. By itself, or self, swa. Also has a connotation of like, in other contexts, like automatic. Automatic meaning by itself. Bhava is being, self-being, self-existing. And here it says, the five skandhas don't have, none of them has any intrinsic nature, has any swabhava. If things lack intrinsic nature, That means looking at the situation from one side, right? One side you say they lack intrinsic nature. Then the other side you could say, but what do they have? Do they have anything? I mean, it's not a given that they will have, but in this case, yes, they do. They lack intrinsic nature. What do they not lack? No, not Buddha nature in this case. Huh? Conditional appearances. They still appear. They don't lack conditions. They don't lack conditional being, meaning existing based on conditions, temporary conditions. In other words, this topic of emptiness is also can be explained using another concept: interdependence. Interdependently arising. So it goes back to non-theistic, not single cause, don't stand on its own, but appearing, existing interdependently, and that which exists interdependently exists momentarily. In other words, if you use another technical term, we are talking about impermanence. And that one is closer to home. Emptiness, lack of inherent existence, we will veer off in philosophy. Impermanence, right in your face. Especially if you stand in front of a mirror. And look, oh, another freckle just turned up. Another line. Or turning gray. So he sees, he perceives these 5 skandhas to be empty of intrinsic nature, of inherent nature. Let's take a break. Unless you have a question that you really need to ask. Yes?
The 3 marks of existence, and there's a third one there.
Yes, so there's this called the 3 marks of existence, which is, dukkha, suffering, anicca, impermanence, and then not self. Yeah. So there are 3 ways of basically talking about the same thing, if you really understand. Yeah. And so impermanence, then to take it even closer to home, right? Even impermanence, if you run around long enough in Buddhist circles, it becomes this word, impermanence, Then it loses, its meaning in a way. You walk around, impermanent, impermanent, right? So even take it home to even closer, it means what? Uncertainty. Not sure. Not sure. Uncertain. Now you're like, oh, that, yeesh. Not sure. So we'll have a break. For how long? Not sure. Don't run away too far. 15 minutes or so. I'm gonna leave that. Te parasangha te bodhi soha te yata om ka te para ka te parasangha te bodhi soha te yata om ka te para ka te parasangha te bodhi soha te yata Gate para gate para sangate bodhi soha tiyata Te gate para sangate bodhi soha tiyata Om gate Paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om Paragate parasangate bodhi soha te yata om gate 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 paragate parasangate bodhi soha. So in one of the commentaries, Indian commentaries, my favorite of the 8 commentaries by this Indian master called Prashasta Sena, he says, when we use this word emptiness, he says there are at least there's at least 5 types of emptiness that could be the case. Of course, when he gives the 5, he says, not these first 4. We're talking about the 5th. But what are the 4? So it's helpful to look at what kind of emptiness it is not in this case. So he says, there is the emptiness of what did not exist before. And then there is the emptiness of what does not exist afterwards. Okay? And then there is the emptiness of the utterly non-existent. And the emptiness of one not existing in the other. Don't worry, he'll give examples. Yeah? The emptiness of what did not exist before, the emptiness of what does not exist after being destroyed, the emptiness of the utterly non-existent, the emptiness of one not existing in the other, and finally the emptiness of intrinsic nature, which is what we're talking about here. Yeah. So what is the example for the first one? The absence of yogurt in milk is the emptiness of what did not exist before. It's interesting, the example he gives, because they are related. Yeah, there's a causal relationship between milk and yogurt. But yogurt does not exist in milk. What does not exist before? Then the absence of milk in yogurt is the emptiness of what does not exist after being destroyed. Milk is destroyed so that it can become yogurt. So there's a causal relationship, but it's not these two kinds of emptiness, he says. When we say form is empty or form is emptiness. So meaning here is saying, we're not saying, like if you smash form, if you smash this mug, then you say, oh, form is emptiness. There used to be form, now, boom, 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 no more form, emptiness. It says, we're not talking about this, right? Basically. Or, there was clay prior to this, now there is mug. We're also not talking about that kind of emptiness. The emptiness of the utterly non-existent. So he says, what is an example? The absence of horns on the head of a rabbit. Rabbits do not have horns. There are other examples. Turtle hair. But based on that, right, there is a clothing company in Maine or Vermont that's called rabbit hair or rabbit fur. Yeah. A turtle. Yeah, turtle, sorry. Yeah, turtle fur. Yeah, so rabbit horns, turtle fur, son of a barren woman, and then these are some of the often repeated examples of emptiness of the utterly non-existent. Yeah. He says it's also not this. And then the absence of the emptiness of one not existing in the other. And the example is, or the explanation is, it's like the emptiness of an ox in a horse. There's no ox in a horse. Although from far away you might think you're seeing an ox, but actually no. And so here it says it's the fifth one, which is the emptiness of intrinsic nature. And a Tibetan commentator later on gave an example, although Prashasta Sena himself doesn't give. And he says, it's like looking from afar and seeing, basically he used a pile of rocks, but what he's referring to is a scarecrow, and think that there is a person. So here, this mistake that we make is mistaken identity. Seeing a pile of rocks in the middle of a field that has maybe a hat on it, and even two sticks, that looks like hand, we think, oh, there's a person. where in fact there is no person, but there is a pile of rocks. So likewise, there's no intrinsic nature here, but there are a pile of aggregates, here called the five aggregates. And here called the five aggregates. Now, later in some commentaries, it actually says this, in fact, this intrinsic nature is also, you could say, the emptiness of the utterly non-existent. Because there never was an owner. This intrinsic nature never existed in the first place. But we impute intrinsic nature into ourselves, into others, into even impersonal, non-sentient things, situation. You say, really? I don't do that. In fact, until this afternoon, I've never heard of this word. I've never heard of this expression, intrinsic nature. What do you mean? Right? You could say, to say that it's empty of intrinsic nature seems to be creating a problem that didn't exist before. What's the big deal? Now, the Buddha says, actually, no. Whether you know this expression or not, basically all of us, in a state of confusion, have imputed intrinsic nature onto everything and everyone, beginning with our own sense of self. The Buddha has no quarrels with the ordinary, commonsensical sense of self. The Buddha doesn't negate that. Yeah, the self that says, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to pick up some stuff. What do you need? Right? That commonsensical self, whether yourself or asking another person, Fabiola, I'm going to go to the store. Do you need anything? I'll pick them up and drop them off on my way back. That sense of self, no problem, no issue. The Buddha doesn't have any quarrels with that commonsensical self. Doesn't deny the existence of that. That functional self. It's the self in the sense of intrinsic nature, right, as it says here. Right? The Buddha says that kind of self doesn't exist. Except for as an imagination. Except for as an imputation. Except for as a projection. That projection is a projection. It's an artificial glue that you pour over a bunch of ever-changing, ever-moving, ever-unstable conditions. Onto a process, we have imputed a self or selves. So another way of understanding this is to say, maybe using modern expression, contemporary expression, what the Buddha does not deny is that there is a process going on here. And more to it, a bundle of processes, which is what skandhas are. There's a bundle of processes going on here. And if you want to zoom in and look closer, then you can say there are mental, emotional processes, a bunch of that, and physical processes. Physical processes is form, fall under the label of form. So here it says Next. Form is empty. Emptiness is also form. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling is empty. Emptiness is also feeling. Perception is empty. Emptiness is also perception. Formation is empty. Consciousness is empty. And so this is to be applied to all 5 of the 5 skandhas. So here, the physical processes are covered under this one label called form. Mental emotional processes fall under, and the Buddha says, you can say a lot about mental emotional processes, of course, right? In modern psychology, in psychiatry, there are even more. But for the purposes of having no fear with regards to the task of becoming Buddha for the benefit of all beings, for that is sufficient to see that what we call my mind, my thoughts, my feelings, my identity, me, all of that are nothing but bundles of these 4 types of mental emotional processes, which the Buddha identified as feeling or sensation, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. So with regards to these, if there's anything at all that is going on here, there are these 5 bundles, and bundled together, that exist. But there is no intrinsically or independently existing I that owns this. Now you might find this kind of like hard to wrap your head around. You say, I don't know, like, what do you mean? Like, isn't there an I, right? You say, I certainly feel like there's an I. Yeah. Buddha says, yeah, I'm sure you feel that there is an I. But do we need, let's step back and say, do we really need an intrinsically existing I beyond the bundle? Do we or do we not? Asking this question from the point of view of like, can it cohere, right? This idea that there is a bundle of processes, but there's no owner. There's no owner lurking behind this.
Yeah, weather. Weather.
Weather, yeah, even closer to home.
Eating?
How?
Taking care of this body.
Oh, right, yeah, but
I'm going to be useful to others.
But how does this cohere without the existence of an I in an ultimate sense?
Because it's all interdependent.
Yes, of course. It's interdependent, but I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm not asking a good question. What I'm trying to say is, in our modern scientific viewpoint, there's no souls. Right? The scientific explanation does not require postulating a soul, a self that owns this. So in that way, the Buddha's analysis is very similar to contemporary scientific view of what is here. Yeah, science does not feel the burden of asking, but who is this? It's a bunch of processes.
It's causal efficacy.
It's causal efficacy.
And then we just label this as
Yeah.
for this
then of course emotionally we always can't resist. Didn't you say label? But who is doing the labeling? Right? That is like an emotional need.
That's causal efficacy also.
Yes. Yeah. And that is part of the skandhas. But then we find it so hard to wrap around this idea that there's no need. Right? Now, not only there is no need, but when that turns up, it messes things up. That is the problem. The illusion is the problem that we need to clear. Because whether we clear it or not, right, effectively is the utterly non-existent. This projection, this label, it actually, substantially speaking, doesn't exist. So whether you realize it or not, it is like that. But the illusion is getting in the way. The illusion is the one that suffers, that carries the burden of suffering. So if you can dispel the illusion, then you become without fear. And without fear, you can accomplish the Bodhisattva vow. Why? Because there's no accomplishing. This weaving through reasoning and suspension of logic is part of the dynamic here in understanding the Heart Sutra. Use reasoning as a finger pointing to the moon, as they say. The reasoning itself is not it. But through reasoning, you can glimpse the moon in the sky. So it's not and sometimes I think, again, in the scholastic tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, they I feel, get stuck with the reasoning. And so they train to get so good at the reasoning and then miss the moon. They know everything about the finger,
Not independent anymore.
Yeah, and then like moon, who cares, moon? Sometimes they even proudly would say, kind of like, with a grain of salt, like moon, let's look at the finger. Kind of knowingly, because it's very exciting, this whole debate tradition, I'm reminded, why did I come across this? Oh yeah, David Brooks came up with a book recently published, Who You Are, or something like that. And in there he said that being a graduate of University of Chicago, where we pride ourselves in having, theory. So much so that he says, like on campus, there are these T-shirts that says, one side University of Chicago, right? The other side that it says, sure, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? Like, meta super intellectualization, right? It's like, yeah, it works in practice, but the real question is, does it work in theory, And sometimes, right, this material can become something like that, but it's not meant for this. To the degree the Buddha uses reasoning, and Buddha uses reasoning a lot. Because why? Especially during his time, right? The alternative to reasoning is belief. And belief carrying the weight of tradition with a capital T. And he didn't see that as useful. Not to say that they're always useless, but for the most part, he didn't see that as useful. Sometimes, the weight of tradition can lead us in the right direction. But given the historical Buddha's context, He didn't choose that method. Rather, he did say, think through this, reason this out. But there are limits to reasoning too, because it's not an end by itself. It's a tool. And the Heart Sutra uses, and the commentaries for the Heart Sutra definitely uses this. So now back to that question of, so intrinsic nature. Is that a real problem? Yes. We may not use the vocabulary, but we impute intrinsic nature to everything. To all our experiences, to our own sense of self. Intellectually, if you sit aside and you say, oh yes, there's no self. But the problem is emotionally. It's always lurking there. A random stranger, yelling some profanity at you has different effect than someone you really care about saying something even less. What's going on there? There's nothing objective going on there. Yeah? It's because of imputed intrinsic existence. Yeah? This table, do you impute intrinsic existence? You might say no. Well, that's because you're not me. I do. I know exactly how I got this table. I know how it came here. And all that story, the stories we tell about these things, is where intrinsic nature sneaks in. So that if I came tomorrow and every single part of this table is still here but configured differently, I will have a very different response from you walking in. You walk in, you're like, oh, too bad, right? Me walking away, what? That's the intrinsic nature that we're talking about. Yes, there was a question or comment.
So in this teaching then, I'm almost certain we're just our physical body. There's nothing more than our physical body.
No, we're not our physical body even. No, whatever we identify as that I, we give a landing ground for suffering.
Do we even exist?
That's easy, Can you pinch him, please? Yeah. And that's enough. Again, not metaphysics.
No tough question.
Yeah. Or just not metaphysics. The Buddha wasn't interested in metaphysics. Huh? And he's not even interested in philosophy.
But these teachings are philosophy.
No, not for the Buddha. It's medicine. Medicine. Yeah. Buddha wasn't a philosopher. In fact, when people came and asked philosophical questions, he didn't answer. And then they walk away, and Ananda says, Lord, we have heard you talking about this before. He says, I know, but he wasn't asking it as an existential question. He was interested in these questions as philosophical propositions. Then I don't have much to say. Yes.
So the idea is to recognize that on a relative level or a practical level, we exist.
Yes.
We feel pain.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
But the ultimate level
Mhm.
needs to be lurking back here so that we don't get upset about it or react to it
Yes.
necessarily or have a whole big story about the pinch.
It's so,
But it's-
yeah.
It's more than that, but.
It's more than that, but we begin there. Yeah. It's more than that because Buddha is not simply, oh, I'm not bothered by things. Yes.
So the problem is that our need to tell a story about ourselves distorts our reality.
Habit, yes. This habit. Even more subtle than telling stories is how we immediately impute self or other into everything. And that just gets in the way. So sometimes I say our practice is the practice of getting out of the way.
Would you call that impulsive, the way you did?
For sure, it's an impulse that has been habituated. And because it's been habituated, you can dehabituate.
So then the purpose of the dialogue is to kind of short circuit the dialogue?
You could say that, yes.
Like the Zen koan?
Yes,
thing,
yeah.
where you're sort of
Yeah.
identifying
And leave you,
intellectual-
kind of, you could say, leave you in a state of experiencing being rather than becoming. Yeah, rather than becoming. Becoming is this endless, constant process of becoming. In fact, that's one of the basic meanings of bhava. Remember bhava? Swabhava. And swabhava, bhava is intrinsic nature, translated as intrinsic nature, but bhava is a more active word. It's not just nature or existence. There's a sense of toil going on, becoming. There's a sense of like something laborious is going on. Yeah? So you have seen like this thing called the Wheel of Life, right? The painting. Yeah? It's that translation is not very good. Because this wheel of life, then you say, oh, it's all bad. Look at that. There's some demon. You know, it's Buddhist, gosh. You know, party poopers. No, it's the wheel of becoming. Bhava chakra. So it's not life. But in our terms, it's not life, you know. Like, you know, that other t-shirt, life is good. Buddha says can be good. But if your life is bhava, then it's probably not good. Because it's in a constant state of stress and toiling. I want. How about I be? Well, grammatically that doesn't work, but it's not my first language, so I can do all kinds of things with it. Yeah? Instead of I want to become this, I want to become that.
No, I am.
Yeah, I am. Yeah? But that I am cannot involve ideas of what am, you know? Yeah? So to become free and not tethered to, whether physical or even spiritual, in fact.
So it's a transcendent space?
It's not transcendent as in gone from here. It's totally here. Yeah, you see all the practices, right? Like leaving the sense doors open. So it's not transcendence. Yeah? It's not samadhi, because there are certain types of samadhi where you go in and people would boast about, oh, I can sit for 6 hours. Yeah? And not feel a thing. Well, in some cases, it's a medical problem. You practice how long to get there? You know, cheaper ways, you know, buy yourself a sensory deprivation tank. That's not the goal, right? You know? So it's a certain kind of transcendence, yeah? But not the kind that says, I need to get out from here to be somewhere else. But to be present. And so here it says, form is empty, but emptiness is form. So it's not, you do not achieve this freedom after you destroy form. In fact, tomorrow we'll get into more details about this. Once you get this, the rest of the sutra is easy. Yeah, the rest of the sutra is just repeating in different contexts. And also in this context, it's like this. And also in this context, it's like this. And also in this context, it's like this. So tomorrow what we want to take a closer look is how When we say form is emptiness, right? We're not saying form is emptiness. Yeah? But rather, right here, it's also empty. It's functional. That's why our friends out there can hear me. But its functionality and its empty of intrinsic nature are not in opposition. Form and emptiness exist interdependently. In fact, to say that it's empty always implies that there is form to start with. So there is no emptiness to be understood aside from form. I know, you're like, what? But don't think too much. Intuit that. For lack of a better word, intuit that. There's no emptiness to be understood, to be realized, using Buddhist language, apart from form. And in fact, that is the whole purpose. It's because we are constantly experiencing form that it is right there that we need to understand emptiness. So this emptiness is not achieved by running away from form, running away from sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Outside of the experience of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thoughts, emptiness has no meaning and no purpose. The Buddha did not teach about this for the purpose of you achieving emptiness. We say that is nihilistic. That is a nihilistic view. So here also, to anticipate tomorrow, emptiness is also not like in some traditions they would speak of emptiness as the source of everything. Like emptiness is where all things appear or is born from. It's not the mother in that sense. That is more a Taoist viewpoint. I'm not saying right or wrong. It's just different. Yeah, so we are not trying to achieve emptiness, but our training is designed to help us realize emptiness. But not realize emptiness in the abstract, but in the context of form, in the context of feeling, in the context of perception, in the context of mental formations, in the context of consciousness. It's also not just bodies, because we also believe in, disembodied beings. All kinds of rituals. Sunday morning, you're a regular. Dum 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 dum. Relating to unseen beings and, establish a relationship with that. It's a comprehensive kind of view that involves all these different modes of relating to experiences.
Does that view have to be habituated over time so that you see?
Yes, habituated. Yeah, that's meditation.
Okay.
To habituate, to get used to familiarize. Because the problem is habit. We have very strong habit patterns. So certain, what we call like blessings, like in the presence of a great master, or sometimes in the presence of trauma, a window opens, for us to see more clearly. And that's the real meaning of blessing. But after that blessing, if we don't have a method to fold in, to habituate, then it's a lost opportunity. Including death is one of those windows, one of those openings. And you say, well, that's too late. Well, that's if you think you are the body. But we don't think that. We think there is continuity, but not the normal way of continuity. Uncle Ben is now a cow. No. That's too.
Uncle Ben, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's too crude, that understanding of rebirth. It's not like that. Unless it's an Indian cow. Then if it's an Indian cow, it's, Uncle Ben, what are you not doing? Get to do whatever they want.
Maybe too much rice.
Most Indian cows I've seen eat trash, unfortunately. Plastic bag, paper. Oh, yeah. Oh. Speaking of death, we have a screening of this documentary called what?
The last
Ecstatic days.
Hmm?
The last ecstatic days.
The Last Ecstatic Days, which is filmed in Swannanoa. It's going to be released nationally at some later point, so this is a pre-release because of our connection to the Center for Conscious Living and yeah,
Conscious Center for Living and Dying.
for Living and Dying. What day?
on the 23rd. It's a Saturday.
What time? Come on, don't make me.
7 p.m. Saturday, the 25th.
You need to get enough tissues. You
Yeah.
will need a lot of tissues.
No, you won't. That's the point of the movie.
No, not sad, but it's not tissues of sadness, for sadness, but the transformative experience of this young man as he dies. It's all filmed. So I read a, one of the Joan Halifax, a Buddhist teacher who has done a lot in this area. And she's saying what's inspiring about this is you see an ordinary person, not a Dalai Lama, not a Mother Teresa, having this profound experience as he's dying. So meaning it's possible for all of us. So plan well.
So it was an experience that he asked for,
Mm-hmm.
and a group of people provided it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we would say all the interdependencies came together.
I have a question.
Yes.
About, the experiences that happen at, let's say, you have a near-death experience.
Mhm.
So you have an ecstatic experience.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so there's no given that 50 years later, when you actually do die, that you would go to the same ecstatic
Yeah.
experience. Okay.
Right. There's no guarantee.
There's no, okay. So it's all relative.
It's all relative in the sense of like it's unsure. And so let's train. So not it's unsure, therefore make it sure. That's what we think is the solution. But to really get that it's unsure. Do we move or not? That's samadhi. Samadhi is not locking everything down so that it's now certain. Because the very nature of everything is it's uncertain. So training with uncertainty. Certainty, right, is a variation of projecting intrinsic existence, intrinsic nature, onto things that are fundamentally without that.
Can you be certain about the Buddha Dharma and the teachings of?
On that level, you can say that, right? But you should also not therefore think, I can always control everything my mind, Yeah. I mean, there are some Buddhist traditions or some Buddhist teachers that may give that impression, like, oh, you need to achieve certainty, and once you have certainty, everything will be fine, But I think in the more subtle, profound teachings, they actually say, no, that's not how it is. Yeah? That's not how it is. The only certainty you can count on is that it's uncertain. But it doesn't just leave you there, It says, okay, now let's take that into your experience. Not just as a clever label, a clever phrase, the only certainty is uncertainty. And then you just leave it to uncertainty and see what happens, No, now that needs to be folded. Nyam len, nyam su len pa. Take that nyam, take that into your nyam. Take that teaching into your experience. And as you experience, as you train with that, you become more and more comfortable with uncertainty. In other words, you become more and more comfortable with things as they are, rather than things as you expect them to be. So we continue tomorrow, and I'm sorry, you're going to have 1 hour less to sleep tonight, but that's because you got one extra months before. So for those of you who don't have this crazy time-changing business, please know that we are going to meet 1 hour earlier than wherever you are in Guatemala, in Mexico. It's possible to end this. Everything is impermanent. Mexico, by the way, ended this whole daylight savings business last year. Yes. So it's possible to end. Everything is subject to change. So they actually did it. So at the end, there is, we end our practices, just as we open our practices with the recitation. At the end, we call it sealing the practice with dedication. Yeah, so I want to, please, recitation, turn to page 142. Don't worry if you don't have the text, you just listen. Yeah? Page 142 at the bottom. Then we're going to go to page 143, the first full one on 43 bodhicitta. Just these two. We're going to recite these two together. By this merit may I achieve the omniscient state. May all who wander on the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death cross the ocean of samsara by defeating all enemies, confusion, bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind. Where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, ever increase higher and higher. I believe tickets are needed for that event.
Yeah, for the movie, you have to register. So to register, there's a URL that you can find on our Facebook page. So if you go there, you can find it. or you can.
What if I'm not on Facebook?
If you're not on Facebook.
You're out of luck.
You can still actually view it, but also you can see me if you're very interested, and I can write it down for you, or someone else can help you.
And then on the Wednesday 20th, is it?
Yes. 20.
Wednesday the 20th at 7 p.m., there is an opportunity to formalize your taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So it's a going for refuge ceremony. Each Buddhist tradition has its own way of formalizing that process, that step. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's a short ceremony that is done where you formally take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It is not as big as it sounds. Also, it's not as pedestrian either. It's not as big as it sounds because I have people, and it's good that people are being intentional about it, but I hear so often it's like, I want to be absolutely sure before I do it. It's not like that. But it's a good way to formalize so that it marks the beginning of, at least for now, you say, I want to adopt this process of changing. And so I go to the Buddha for refuge. Going to the Buddha for refuge is not saying, oh, I will only believe in the Buddha, I won't believe in anybody else. At the core of going to the Buddha for refuge is saying, I temporarily, or at least I have enough faith, and so it's faith, that Siddhartha achieved what he achieved, and what he achieved, like he said, is possible for me. So that much. That's taking refuge in the Buddha, and therefore I will go to the Buddha as my guide. Going to the Buddha as guide is not becoming a slave. It's saying, I will turn to the Buddha as my reference point. Going to the Dharma as refuge is to say, I have confidence that what he taught is still available today, and I am going to engage that for the purpose of becoming like him. And taking refuge in the Sangha, here Sangha, I want to emphasize, we're not talking about this. This is a Sangha, but when we take refuge in the noble Sangha. And that is referring to those who have achieved the path of seeing. But there is no, path of seeing thermometer that you can order from Amazon to stick into people and see, Yeah, so it's not yet, right? So it's more this principle that guidance is possible. So Buddha is the doctor, Dharma is the prescription, the medicine, Sangha are the kind nurses that will nurse us back to health. And we say we will rely on them. We will take their advice. So this is the refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. In the Tibetan tradition, it says that you need to, after you have done the ceremony, it will then you need to change your attitude. So that you work on that, changing your attitude. Then second, you need to change your appearance. So, what does that mean? So symbolically, a few strands of hair is clipped. In the ancient Indian context, it was kind of a radical thing. Because all the upper classes, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the privileged classes, they wear a tuft of hair. The men, they would shave their hair and have this one tuft as a sign of like being part of the higher caste. So in ancient India, when you took refuge, when you became Buddhist, it's kind of a social protest of some sort. You cut that tuft. You say, I don't play by this game anymore. But now, we symbolically cut, and also symbolizes the cutting of that confusion, that kind of hierarchy, that kind of division. We cut. So that's the changing of appearance.
Do you need any hands?
Yeah, no hands to be severed. And then a change of name. A change of name, I think, is talking about how your identity, you need to work on shifting that. And so you're given a name. No, you don't have to go change your name with the registrar. It's just you're given a Dharma name. So the 3 changes. Anyway, that's on the 20th, 7 p.m. You can come out of curiosity. You can come because you want to do that ceremony. Doesn't matter. So you're invited to join us because there's a number of people here who have requested that. So we're going to do that on the 20th. So anyway, see you tomorrow, either in person or on Zoom. You all have a good rest of Saturday. And ta-ta. Bye-bye, everyone.